Within the next minutes, we will present to you data so clinically damning, a historical precedent so deliberately buried, that it will permanently reframe your understanding of modern relationships. This is not an appeal to emotion, nor a cry of defeat. It is the unveiling of a revolution hidden in plain sight. A movement of men who, with cold clarity and historical wisdom, are walking away, not in surrender, but in self-liberation. This growing phenomenon of older men choosing solitude is not a symptom of failure. It is a historically informed, strategically calculated exit from a system that no longer offers them peace, purpose, or respect. This awakening begins not with numbers, but with a man. Let's call him James. He is 58 years old. For 28 years, James lived within the confines of a marriage that he now describes as a slow, polite erosion. He was the provider, the partner, the father, the therapist, the fallback plan. With each year, the roles stacked up, but the recognition diminished. He navigated ever-changing expectations with the quiet desperation of a man trying to keep a leaking ship afloat. When the divorce finally struck, the financial devastation was swift. But what lingered was deeper than debt. It was the silence of his new apartment, the echo chamber of regret and realization that drove him into an internal reckoning. Alone, James conducted an emotional audit, an accounting of a lifetime of suppressed needs, quiet sacrifices, dreams placed gently on dusty shelves, and accomplishments subtly minimized. Every criticism was highlighted in bold, every desire dismissed as selfish. He reviewed every interaction, every compromise, every unspoken rule he had bent himself to accommodate. And what remained on the other side of that ledger? His time, his solitude, his freedom. For the first time in decades, he owned every minute of his day. And that autonomy, so simple, so quiet, felt more valuable than any companionship offered by a system that had already taken so much. To date again would mean stepping back into a game with invisible rules, a rulebook that shifts without warning, where the terms are vague and the penalties high. James didn't just avoid dating, he rejected it with the calm certainty of a man who had run the numbers. He had lived the costs, and the peace he had now? It was not worth gambling. Solitude for James was not loneliness. It was sovereignty. He would rather die alone than die slowly in the cage of someone else's design. And this sentiment, once whispered only in private moments of despair, is now silently shouted by thousands. James is not an anomaly. He is the early wave of a broader movement, a quiet exodus of men who are choosing peace over performance. But this story isn't new. It has unfolded before. Each time, society asked more of men than it gave back. Go back 1,000 years to Mount Athos, where not a single woman has stepped foot in over a millennium. The monks who lived there cloaked their departure from society in religious devotion, but their writings reveal something deeper, a conscious rejection of the expectations that came with family and marriage. They weren't fleeing women, they were fleeing the emotional debt, the social obligations, and the endless role-playing that came with domestic life. In choosing a life of brotherhood, prayer, and preservation, they created something enduring. These monks kept art, knowledge, and culture alive through centuries of darkness. Their solitude wasn't pathetic, it was powerful. Their abstention wasn't weakness, it was focus. Fast forward to the 19th century, and you'll find another voice echoing this sentiment. Arthur Schopenhauer, the German philosopher, wrote with an almost surgical brutality about the institution of marriage and the dynamics between men and women. His essay on women, though controversial, wasn't born of whim. It came from meticulous observation of his era's laws and customs. He saw marriage as legalized entrapment, where a man's rights were halved and his duties doubled. To Schopenhauer, Romantic relationships were a cleverly disguised system designed to perpetuate the species at the expense of male reason, autonomy, and peace. He saw it not as sacred, but as systematically irrational. His solution? Solitude. Not just physical, but intellectual solitude. His world revolved around philosophy and his beloved poodle, Atma. That solitude, untouched by compromise, was the only space where his mind could fully breathe. His choice, like James's, was not a retreat. It was a stand. And now, this pattern repeats, not just in anecdote, but in data. In 2022, the Pew Research Center revealed a rising trend. A growing number of American adults, particularly older men, are unpartnered. But the deeper insights come from a more focused study, a long-term analysis by the University of Chicago's National Opinion Research Center. This research tracked life satisfaction in men over 50 across 3 relationship statuses: continuously married, divorced and repartnered, and divorced but intentionally single. The results weren't just surprising, they were paradigm-shifting. After controlling for wealth and health, it was the intentionally single men, those who had chosen solitude, who reported the highest levels of consistent peace. Their stress levels, measured through biomarkers like cortisol, were lower. Their sense of autonomy was greater. Their daily satisfaction was higher. Men who had repartnered experienced a brief spike in happiness, a honeymoon effect that quickly faded. And worse, it often settled at a level below their pre-relationship baseline. Why? Because the cycle had restarted. The negotiation, the compromise, the emotional labor, the maintenance. The audit never ends. The peace that solitude offered was not replicated by companionship. For many, it was destroyed by it. This revelation threatens the foundations of modern romantic culture, because it exposes a truth no one wants to say aloud. For a growing number of older men, relationships aren't just disappointing. They are detrimental. The narrative of the lonely old man dies under scrutiny. The reality? He's not lonely. He's recovering. Let's take another man. Robert, 62, a retired engineer. After his divorce, he dipped his toes into the dating pool through the modern miracle of online apps. What he found was not connection, but commerce. Every conversation seemed less about compatibility and more about value extraction. One date, only 45 minutes in, turned into a negotiation. The woman laid out her plan: combine finances, sell his sports car, use his condo equity to help her daughter buy a house. Robert realized in that moment he wasn't being seen. He was being priced, audited, categorized. His personhood was an appendix to be reviewed after the financials had cleared. That dinner was not a date. It was an acquisition meeting, and it was the last one he ever attended. He didn't leave bitter. He left clear. The dating marketplace wasn't about romance. It was about utility. He now spends his days restoring vintage motorcycles, hiking the Rockies alone, and diving into the engineering marvels of ancient Rome. He's not lonely. He's fulfilled. He opted out not out of fear, but because he saw the game for what it really was, and decided he no longer wanted to play. The deeper truth begins to surface through stories like Robert's, not as isolated anecdotes, but as reflections of a broader pattern. As men grow older, their neurological chemistry changes. The impulsive dopamine chases of youth begin to fade. What replaces them is a state of heightened pattern recognition, calm focus, and risk aversion. The older man doesn't seek novelty. He seeks stability. He doesn't chase potential. He evaluates liability. He is no longer blindly hopeful. He is sharply aware. Every interaction is filtered through a lifetime of lived experience. The woman who smiles at him is not just a potential partner. She is a probability field. Every word, every gesture is subconsciously measured against thousands of past interactions, against a long archive of memories soaked in emotional effort, disappointment, and exhaustion. A seemingly innocent request for emotional intimacy? It echoes the 3 a.m. argument that spiraled into nothingness. A suggestion to combine lives? It triggers a spreadsheet of compromises, of assets lost, of freedom forfeited. The excitement of new love is dwarfed by the predictability of future conflict. What used to be romantic is now risk. What used to be thrilling is now draining. The older man is not cynical. He is calibrated. Every sacrifice he made in the past is now part of a calculation that leads him to a quiet but irrevocable conclusion. Peace is worth more than partnership. This is the dark enlightenment, when a man looks back and realizes that the love he gave, the affection he showed, and the effort he poured into relationships were not always reciprocated with grace or even gratitude. Instead, he sees a long series of transactions where he was expected to give more, do more, fix more, become more, while slowly losing touch with his own identity. He was cast as the fixer, the buffer, the provider, the emotional sponge, and in return, he received obligations dressed up as intimacy. When he zooms out, he no longer sees a love story. He sees a negotiation, a performance, a burden, one in which he was perpetually adapting, giving, providing, and where the reward was often conditional, transactional, or fleeting. The scales were never balanced, and the quiet, unspoken conclusion becomes clear. If he continues this pattern, he will spend the final chapters of his life serving others' expectations, never his own. There's historical precedent for this awakening. During the American Civil War, countless men returned from battle, traumatized and disillusioned, only to find that the homes they fought to protect no longer felt like homes at all. Many chose not to return. Instead, they headed west, into the unknown, into the brutal promise of the frontier. They preferred hardship and clean suffering over the complex emotional entanglements they left behind. They wrote letters, many of which historians now view as testimonies to a deeper form of masculine grief, the grief of being alienated from one's own purpose and sense of peace. Today's frontier is not land. It's psychological. It's social. It's digital. The older man is not grabbing a rifle and heading west. He's logging off. He's deleting apps. He's turning inward. And in that silence, in that solitude, he begins to find something rare, something he hasn't had in years, himself. But this is only half the picture. So far, we've looked at the male perspective, the audit, the data, the decision to opt out. To understand the full engine behind this exodus, we must examine the systemic conditions that pushed these men to leave, not just personal stories or social changes, but deeply buried research that was too dangerous to be made public. In the immediate aftermath of World War II, amidst the rubble of broken cities and broken lives, a clandestine social science study was commissioned by a Western government. The goal was simple: determine the psychological behaviors that either stabilized or destabilized societies in times of crisis. Specifically, the researchers were tasked with analyzing female loyalty and bonding behavior in extreme post-war conditions, refugee camps, repatriation programs, and migration patterns of so-called war brides. What they found was chilling. Female hypergamy, the instinct to form pair bonds with partners of equal or higher status, was not a social behavior. It was a survival mechanism. When social, legal, and religious consequences were weakened, women did not merely drift from their original partners. They detached with astonishing speed and predictability. Maimed soldiers, traumatized husbands, and financially ruined fathers were quietly replaced by stronger, richer, more stable suitors, often soldiers from conquering armies. The study didn't judge. It measured. It quantified. It mapped patterns of repairing behavior that were not random, but algorithmic. And the most terrifying conclusion was not the behavior itself, but its scale. These weren't isolated cases of infidelity or disloyalty. This was a systemic reallocation of affection and loyalty based entirely on status, strength, and opportunity. The researchers proposed a stark hypothesis. In any society where abundance of choice collides with weakened consequences, female bonding becomes wholly dependent on male performance. The moment a man can no longer provide, protect, or maintain value, the emotional bond dissolves. Loyalty becomes conditional. Love becomes contingent. Marriages built on permanence collapse into temporary arrangements. This report was never published. It was sealed, classified, and buried in an archive. Why? Because the implications were too dangerous. Western societies were trying to rebuild trust, family, and long-term stability. Publicizing a document that framed female loyalty as status-dependent would have been social dynamite. The goal was not to reveal uncomfortable truths. The goal was to rebuild faith in the nuclear family. But time has a way of surfacing buried truths. The environment described in that post-war study is not unique to a historical crisis. It is alive and thriving in the world today. Digitally connected, infinitely optional, consequence-free, and hyper-competitive. Dating apps have become the new refugee camps, populated not by the displaced poor, but by individuals seeking higher ground, better options, and permanent upgrades. The smartphone has become a hypergamous engine, a handheld audition room. The church is gone. The family reputation is irrelevant. The social consequences for reallocation of affection are non-existent. A man is only as valuable as his most recent achievement. And so the modern older man doesn't need to read a classified study to know what it feels like. He lives it. He feels it when his value is assessed in real time. He sees it in the dating profiles, in the conversations that begin with job titles, income ranges, and lifestyle preferences. He doesn't need to study the data, because he is the data. His performance is his passport. His resources are his only ticket. And the moment he slips, he vanishes from the algorithm. This shift is not paranoia. It is pattern recognition. He has been through it before, in his marriage, in his friendships, in his workplace. He has seen what happens when his value dips, when his usefulness fades, when his performance falters. He has felt the slow but unmistakable fade of respect, the silent audits, the recalibrations. And now, with decades of evidence behind him, he chooses something different. He does not complain. He calculates. He does not rage. He reframes. He understands that modern intimacy, for many, has become a transactional game. And he refuses to sit at the table. Let's bring this truth into sharper focus with one final story. A man named David, a 55-year-old architect. 2 years after his divorce, David decided to re-enter the dating world. Through an app, he met a woman, and for 6 months, everything seemed beautiful. There was connection, laughter, companionship, a reprieve from the silence that had become his norm. Then, over a quiet dinner, David mentioned in passing that a potential client had fallen through. It wasn't a disaster, just a temporary business hiccup. But something changed. He saw it. Not a look of concern, but of recalculation. The questions that followed weren't about his well-being. They were about his 5-year financial plan, his career trajectory, his stability. The warmth drained from her eyes and was replaced with the cold logic of a strategist reassessing her portfolio. A week later, she ended it, saying she needed someone more secure. David wasn't a failed veteran in a post-war refugee camp. He wasn't homeless or unstable. He was a successful, intelligent, experienced man. But he had stepped off the performance treadmill for a brief moment, and in that moment, he saw what so many others had already come to realize. He wasn't being loved. He was being leveraged. In her eyes, he wasn't a partner. He was a stock with a volatility rating. Her affection was contingent, tied to projected returns. The emotional bond was real only so long as his performance graph pointed upward. And when he saw that pattern with brutal clarity, he made the most important decision of his life. Not to win her back, but to permanently exit the market. He closed his portfolio to outside investors. For good. This is the engine of the exodus. The transformation of intimacy into investment strategy. The older man has realized he is not exiting love. He is escaping commodification. He is walking away from a marketplace that now functions less like a community of hearts and more like a trading floor. He is no longer a person in the eyes of many. He is a fluctuating index of resources, status, and emotional performance. The numbers bear this out. Massive analysis of dating app interactions show a consistent pattern. Women overwhelmingly direct attention to men in their late 20s to early 30s, while men, regardless of age, show high levels of interest across a wide age range. But this is not about preference, it's about value metrics. For women, a man's value spikes with status, income, and perceived long-term viability. For older men, this means being constantly audited, not for who they are, but for what they can still offer. The algorithm doesn't lie, it simply reflects. It mirrors the instinct, operationalizes the impulse, and quantifies the quiet expectations that were once hidden behind the curtain of romance. For a young man, this is still a game with room to run. But for the older man, one who has built, given, and sacrificed, it is the final insult. To be measured not by wisdom, integrity, or inner strength, but by earning potential and material leverage. To have survived decades of work, responsibility, and personal growth, only to be appraised as a diminishing asset. And so he makes the logical, historically validated choice. He steps back. And in doing so, he looks elsewhere for fulfillment. Not to romance, not to approval, but to meaning. He finds it not in the desperate pursuit of affection, but in the quiet cultivation of purpose. He reads the Stoics. He studies the monks of Athos. He reflects on the lives of explorers, thinkers, inventors, men who, when faced with the unbearable weight of social obligation and emotional compromise, turned inward and created something enduring. He realizes something profound. The greatest trauma for a man is not loneliness. It is the severing of his connection to purpose. It is being told his only value is in his performance, not in his being. It is being shaped and reshaped to fit the needs of others until the original shape of his soul is no longer recognizable. So he makes a different choice. He walks a quieter path. Not out of bitterness, but out of wisdom. Not to escape life, but to live it on his own terms. He becomes the lone wolf, the craftsman, the philosopher, the traveler. These are not the paths of losers. They are the paths of legacy. The greatest works of art, the most enduring philosophies, the most powerful inventions. Many were born not in the clutter of domestic negotiation, but in the silence of solitude. These men are not disengaged. They are focused. They are not lost. They are finally free. And this is the inspiring reframe that rewrites the narrative. The man who would rather die alone is not giving up. He is waking up. He is reallocating his finite time, his limited emotional bandwidth, and his final years, not to the exhausting, high-stakes, low-return project of managing modern romance, but to something sovereign, something sacred. He writes his book. He starts his business. He restores his health. He plants a garden. He builds a cabin. He deepens friendships with other men who understand the pact. or he simply sits in peace, cultivating an inner world that was long neglected. He is no longer managing another person's emotional climate. He is finally breathing in the steady air of his own autonomy. And in that peace, in that stillness, something incredible happens. His own thoughts, long drowned out by the constant noise of compromise, finally have space to emerge. For the first time, he hears the voice that had been silenced, the voice of his own truth. The data is in. The history is clear. The great opt-out is not a crisis of masculinity. It is a quiet revolution. It is not a breakdown. It is a breakthrough. Each man who makes this choice becomes a statistical blip in some sociological report. But in his own life, he becomes a king. He rules not over others, but over himself. He has reviewed the facts. He has conducted the audit. He has examined the forbidden data of culture, of personal history, of emotional cost, and he has reached a liberating conclusion. The most fulfilling love story he can write in his final chapters may not be with a partner, but with the man he finally has the time, space, and silence to become. And so, he walks forward. Not into darkness, not into despair, but into something far brighter, the open air,